Now, I'm delighted to say Jonathan Wilson is with us. Jonathan, good morning to you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good. It's been a wild start to the World Cup. Before we talk about the football, can I just get your impression of what kind of impact the politics that's going on at the moment, the stuff with the armband, the migrant rights workers, the controversy, the just that whole kind of sense of it not being a particularly well-oiled machine at the moment. What's your sense of the impact that that's having globally on people's perceptions of this and locally on the ground there?
Well, it clearly dominates everything. I think there's two slightly separate but related issues there. So I think it is very much a European concern, the workers' rights, gay rights, women's rights. I don't think South American, African journalists seem particularly bothered by that. I saw the head of the Japanese FA came out yesterday and said, "Oh, we shouldn't be talking about this." Um, but you sort of assume, or I sort of assumed that there was a danger that when the football started, the talking about the politics would stop. And I sort of, you go into a tournament as a journalist, you sort of think, well, what are the things I've got to keep my eye on? What can I not get distracted by? And I was sort of saying, you've got to always remember what the actual story is here. Well, there's been no problem doing that. Um, that I think FIFA made the armband thing much bigger than it needed to be. I mean, it's a ludicrous prohibition they put in place, given that it doesn't even fall under the remit of their ban on political symbols. In that, the Qatar captain wore a pro-Palestine armband on Sunday. So how being pro-Palestine is not political, but showing a support for the LGBT community in a very, very sort of diluted way, how that somehow is in breach and a very overtly political statement isn't. Whatever you think of the merits of those causes, just makes no sense. But I think that's something that we're finding with everything here, that there is an image and the reality doesn't really bear that out. And you've seen that in loads of different ways. So I mean, it's a very minor thing, but the attendance figures for every game so far have been bigger than the capacity of the stadiums. So somebody's queried that, and FIFA have now sent me a message going, "Oh, you know what? We got the capacities wrong. Actually, all the stadiums are bigger than we said. Sorry about that." And it's nonsense. I was at Senegal, Netherlands yesterday, a 40,000 capacity stadium. I would say maybe 75% of the seats were filled, and yet the attendance was given as 41,000. It was just nonsense. So if you can't trust the numbers for how many people are in the game, well, of course you can't trust the numbers for how many people have died building these stadiums. So yeah, it's been a very odd experience. There's this whole question of the fans you see in the stadiums, are they actually fans? Pretty sure the Dutch and the Senegalese I saw yesterday were. Pretty sure the Ecuadorians on Sunday were. But there's all kinds of stories that group of Qatar fans behind the goal, the ones who actually stayed till the end and made themselves very conspicuous by doing so, that a load of them were shipped in from Lebanon. So there's this sort of sense of unreality. And then there's a story. I mean, look, I have to say now that I have not confirmed this. I don't even know how to begin to confirm this. But was a story yesterday that the sort of white security fences, that the very standard security fences you see whenever there's a crowd, be that in Europe, be it in Africa, be it in America, wherever, that apparently the emir was driving past them last week and decided he didn't like how they looked. And so now a load of them are being replaced by, that sort of, I don't know what it is, it's sort of infinity symbol. It's the mascot of a logo of the tournament, the sort of white band. These white security barriers are being replaced by sort of gold versions of that with gold ropes between them. So the stadium yesterday, Al Tumama, where the Netherlands-Senegal game was, a load of those barriers outside the media centre had changed from the white ones to the gold ones. And you just sort of think, well, what an absurd way of running a tournament. What's an absurd way of running a country where the whim of one man can change that at a handful of days' notice.
Yeah, and it seems like FIFA are happy to just do what they're told. Initially, the beer thing, I was like, well, it's not that unusual. There's no beer in stadiums really, because like I've been to loads of games where if you do buy a beer, it's non-alcoholic. But it's just when you put that together with everything else that is changing at the last minute, you realise, okay, what's actually happening here is that what Qatar said and what they're doing are different,
Yeah.
but FIFA are doing whatever Qatar says.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think the beer is to an extent it's a red herring. Like, I mean, I totally understand if you're, from a Qatari family and you want to go to games in your World Cup and you've suddenly got the prospect of people being drunk next to you, people holding beers next to you. I get that that's not part of your culture. That makes you feel very uncomfortable. And I completely support the right of countries to say, we do not want alcohol. We will not have it in our tournament. That is entirely their right. But they had 12 years to sort that out. It shouldn't be done 48 hours before the tournament. And presumably, there's going to be a compensation has to be paid to Budweiser as a FIFA sponsor. I guess Qatar maybe pay that. And they just sort of think, well, what's another 10, 20, 30, 40 million dollars on top of the 250 billion or whatever it is they've already spent? But you're right. What's concerning about that is it's part of this pattern of, oh yeah, it's not in June, July, it's in November, December. Oh, we're not actually starting on the 21st of November, we're starting on the 20th of November. And we're not having these white security barriers, we're having these goals. It just sort of feels like FIFA have either lost control of the tournament or don't actually care that they're not in control of the tournament. And I think that's why Infantino is such a sort of, I don't know if he's just weak. I don't know if if something else is going on, but he seems entirely happy to let himself be governed by Qatar. And in that sense, I think it's a little bit. He was happily sitting between the Emir and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who, of course, are bidding or probably going to bid for the 2030 World Cup.
Yeah, it's only to be expected. I suspect that this is the start of something as opposed to the end of something, particularly when so much money is at stake. Can we talk about a little bit about the football? What did you make of the team selection yesterday from Gareth Southgate? And is that now a pattern, or is this how he plays against teams? He expects to have more of the ball. He plays with 4 at the back, and the 5 at the back will come back in the round of last 16 against a good team.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I've been slightly surprised by all the discussion around this. I think it's been pretty clear since before the Euros that Southgate's model is England play a back 4.
Oh, we've lost you there. We've lost the sound on you there, Jonathan. We'll get you right back. We'll just take that offline and see if we can re-establish the sound.
They're trying to get into Kev's room and they're trying to cut Jonathan's mic. Yeah, it's mad. Like the more you hear journalists over there talking about situation, you're just like, this is bizarre. And the capacity thing was one of the stranger ones. The fact that FIFA can now turn around and say, oh no, that's actually not the capacity of the stadium. Very, very strange. So yeah, there just seems to be more and more stories out each day that you're just like, this is fairly crazy stuff. But yeah, mad to hear the stories on the ground.
What did you think of Phil Foden not starting?
Before the game, you're like, this is mad. He's one of their best players, if not their best player. And yet, when you see Saka, and if it was Saka that started instead of him, then you're like, well, Saka completely vindified his position. He was brilliant yesterday, and maybe Foden is being used off the bench. Maybe that's a purposeful ploy, but yeah, he's certainly not a bad player to have to come on off the bench for England.
Because there was some suggestion that this was going to be his tournament where he becomes the Gaza style figure, a la Italia 90. Maybe there was something happened in training. Sorry, Jonathan, we're just having an interlude here, a discussion around Phil Foden and him not starting. Tournaments don't always start with the team that finishes them, but it was interesting that he didn't get the nod for the game.
Yes, in some ways. I mean, I think when you play Kane, you want at least one and preferably 2 players who will run beyond him, which you get with Sterling and Saka. So I get the logic of that. Then I guess it becomes a question of, do you play Foden, do you play Mount? And Foden, look, I think Foden is an absolutely brilliant footballer, but he hasn't played particularly well for England ever, really. And I think that might just be an issue of Manchester City is such an idiosyncratic team that the shift from that to a totally different system in international football, maybe that is difficult for him. And Mason Mount, every coach who's ever worked with him says he's an absolute genius, that he understands the shape of the game on the pitch. And I think certainly the last sort of month, 6 weeks, he's been in pretty good form. So I wasn't particularly surprised by that it was Mount over Foden. And I think it's difficult to play the 2 of them in the same England team if you've got Kane there.
I know Borussia Dortmund had refused to approve any price tag for Jude Bellingham, Jonathan, before the World Cup, and you're hearing the rumours of Liverpool and Real Madrid coming in next year. You can kind of see why they've done that now, because this could be the breakout tournament for Bellingham.
Yeah, I mean, we knew he was good, but obviously, if you have a good World Cup, then that increases price tag massively. I mean, to play as well as that with that level of maturity at 19, sorry, excuse me, at 19 is extraordinary, and you know that already I think is one of the great English World Cup debuts.
I hadn't quite realised that he can literally do everything. You know, he could play in any position in the midfield area, and you'd be very confident of having a major impact on the game. It's kind of a unique skill set at this stage.
Yeah, it is, and it's hugely useful to England because, I mean, as we were saying when we lost a connection before, I think England will go back to a back three against teams where they expect the possession to be more contested. And the question then was, well, you want Declan Rice in there. Who plays alongside him? Calvin Phillips did very, very well at the Euros. His range of passing is very good. He gets the ball forward quickly, which I think England at times lack if they play Jordan Henderson there. But obviously his fitness is a big question, just coming back from injury. Whereas Bellingham can drop back and do that, and also give you a little bit more thrust. You know, he's developed that sort of Frank Lampard ability to arrive late in the box. He's clearly a very gifted header of the ball, which I have to say I hadn't particularly realised before. So you know, he gives you everything, and if it does become two central midfielders, as I think it will, then that's a huge positive to have a player with that range of attributes.
Was it essentially the dream result, Jonathan, for Southgate? Because in the end, really, really good performance, but also conceding the 2 goals kind of tempers expectations a little bit, gives them something to improve on and focus on in a negative sense in the pre-match press conference ahead of the next game.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the important thing was A, to win, and B, I think because there was that sort of sense of negativity, that sense of this thing had stagnated, to win in a way that excites people. You know, nobody can say now, oh, you know, Southgate's got to unleash them. Yeah, they've shown in this sort of slightly leashed way, they are perfectly capable of scoring goals, that they do have that incisiveness. So, probably ideally you'd have liked Kane to score, but it doesn't really matter. So, yeah, I mean, I think almost as well, you know, the fact that they concede the penalty, which is, I think it is a penalty, but it's a little bit harsh. And certainly you compare that to the penalty England didn't get early on when Maguire was wrestled to the ground. You sort of think, well, if you're going to have 2 of those decisions go against you, you might as well do it in the game you're winning 6-1 anyway. So get a bit of bad luck out of the way. I can't really see how it could have gone much better. And as you say, with that slight negative that we've got to be a bit careful here. We did concede 2. We can't be going about conceding that kind of chance to, well, maybe Wales and USA, but certainly later on in the competition, assuming them go through.
I know, you know, we were, again, before the line went down, we were talking about how that's been the pattern since before the Euros. The 3-man central defence comes in against the better teams. Is there any possibility that actually the team is maturing to a point where they don't need that?
I mean, possibly. I sort of go back to something Southgate said at the beginning of September before those 2 Nations League games, where he suggested that he'd allowed himself to be deflected in the summer, in those 4 games in June, to go away from his principles. And he was so adamant, you know, that was a wake-up call for him, that he's got to stick to what he believes in. And I think he believes this is the pattern. You know, Southgate's not a spontaneous man. He's somebody who believes in research. He believes in thorough preparation. I mean, if England beat USA and Wales by 4 or 5 in both games, which I'm sure will not happen, maybe he does rethink that. But I'm pretty sure that it'll be the back 3 when they come up against the Netherlands or France or whoever happens to be the first team who are really going to challenge them in midfield.
And look, I understand all the history on that side. I wonder, does Bellingham being so good give him the opportunity to not do that?
Well, possibly. I mean, it might become a case of he wants to get Bellingham in there because I think this happens at World Cups. You get players who suddenly hit a hot streak, and it happened to an extent for England with Trevor Sinclair in 2002, a player of a good player, but by no means a great player. But he had a great World Cup. That for that month period, players suddenly hit a hot streak, and it looks like Bellingham maybe is hitting one. So you've got to sort of. I never think you should build a team around a player. I mean, maybe if you're a smaller nation who only has one great player, Liberia in the days of George Weah, then obviously you do. But if you're in England, then you shouldn't do that. But if you've got a player on a hot streak like that, you want to do everything you can to facilitate that. And maybe it becomes a question of, we want to get him in, but we don't want to give him too much defensive responsibility when he's looking so sharp and so good at getting forward into the box. Do you then play him in midfield with Calvin Phillips as well as Rice and keep the back four? But I still think Southgate will go back to what he planned several weeks ago, because that's who Southgate is, and that's the way his mind works.
Sorry, I know, Jonathan, we touched on the off-pitch matters there at the start, but just specifically on the One Love armband issue, and like, do you think Harry Kane was weak yesterday in not stepping up? And we were kind of sitting and waiting and seeing, even though the associations announced pre-game that they weren't going to allow captains to wear the armband, you kind of waited to see if there was going to be a rogue captain, and Kane could have been one of those. Like, it seemed like a real moment where there was an opportunity to do something fairly big yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, he could have done, but I think it's slightly unfair to expect him to do that. I mean, he's not just got a responsibility to himself. He's got a responsibility to England, to his teammates, to the squad, to the nation, for one of a slightly less ridiculous term. What if he did get a second booking either in the game and suddenly England lose to Iran, or he gets a second booking in the last 16, he misses the quarterfinal, and then suddenly England's chances of getting through are significantly diminished for what is, to be honest, a fairly diluted, futile gesture. Harry Kane is not the villain here. I think the FA maybe could have been stronger. What I would like to have seen, and I accept this was never ever going to happen, but those 7 European federations could have said, all right, book him, and as soon as you book him, we walk out and we don't play this tournament, and we'll take whatever financial punishment you throw at us. And if 7 of them do it, if the Dutch pull out, the Germans pull out, and England pull out, then that's a major problem for FIFA. But that needed solidarity and unity between those 7, and clearly that didn't happen. Maybe Gareth Southgate could have won the armband. I think that would have been a way around it. It doesn't really matter if your manager gets booked. But I just sort of feel with this tournament that it's so easy to get distracted and think, oh, well, Harry Kane could have done this, or the FA could have done this. No, FIFA have done this. It's FIFA the villains here. If you want to look at villains, it's FIFA, it's Qatar. And if you want to even pick somebody, an English player who's at fault, it's David Beckham sitting there having taken his $150 million to promote a terrible regime.
Yeah, I do wonder if it's finished. If somebody somewhere might make a stand. I hope that what the Iranian team did yesterday inspires somebody else to score a goal at the end of the game, whip out the armband, put it on, take the booking, and be like, yeah, so what? What are you going to do to me? So anybody, to make a stand at this point. But here's the thing.
Yeah, but I mean, sorry, I think those two gestures are slightly different. That Iran's is directed back in their own country, and I think there's a genuine possibility that could inspire or provide some kind of solace or consolidation or consolation to protesters there. I just don't know what you achieve if you're Harry Kane, by wearing an armband. What does it do? It slightly annoys the Qataris. So what? It's not going to change anything. Whereas the Iranian gesture, I think, actually genuinely can have an impact on the ground. I think
I would broadly agree. The one thing I would say is, though, that if you are from the community who is LGBTQ+, then having somebody stand up for you in the face of the might of the Qataris and the acquiescence of FIFA might actually mean something.
Sure, I just think there's better ways of doing that than an armband.
But there probably are. I mean, I think what the weird part about all this is that they somehow managed to turn this armband, which is like the most weak, watered down form of alliance that we've really ever seen. Like, it's kind of like the Lance Armstrong, Livestrong thing, like, except the modern day version of it. Like, it ultimately doesn't matter. It doesn't achieve anything. But then FIFA turned it into something.
Yeah.
Which is...
absolutely. I mean, I hadn't even noticed that the Qatar captain was wearing a pro-Palestine armband until this armband thing came up. And then it was pointed out to me. And it's, the double standards and the fact I just didn't even notice. And I suspect, people in the 7 nations would have noticed. And I think a lot of Qataris would probably not really have known what was going on.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. As you said, your preoccupation at the start was to like, how do I make sure that the main story remains the main story and in focus? It looks like it's not going to go away. It looks like actually what has happened here is a little bit of the Streisand effect, where people are going to be talking about it. I see there are reports of rich, educated Qataris now kind of turning on the whole notion of why do we spend all this money to become an international laughingstock? So maybe it has some long-term impact in the geopolitical understanding of Qatar and the general region. I don't know what you think the outcome of all this is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's fascinated me for a while. That when this sort of began in a football context, and look, you can pick prime examples, but it's sort of really this phase of sports washing sort of begins with the Abu Dhabi takeover of City and then the Qatari takeover of PSG. And I think back then we were sort of a little bit, and I say we as a sort of media and as a sort of football culture, we're a little bit naive about it. We didn't really understand what was going on. City went from Thaksin Shinawatra, who is sort of slightly odd Thai politician / millionaire. I don't think he was a billionaire. Don't really understand that. And then some other people have come in, and the full impact of it, I don't think we fully had absorbed. But then, of course, after a decade of that, when the Saudis buy Newcastle, suddenly we know the questions to ask. We know the places to look. We know what it's about. And I wonder if, as our response to sports washing becomes more mature and more nuanced and begins to evolve, that maybe it does have diminishing returns. And the problem with saying this is I don't fully know. I don't feel entirely comfortable I've grasped what Qatar want out of this. I get it's about publicising their nation so that they don't become sort of some minnow that the Saudis can just sort of gobble up, or some other regional power. But in terms of the reputation of their own country, 12 years ago, I didn't give a second thought to migrant workers' rights in Qatar or LGBT rights in Qatar. Whereas now I feel like I'm thinking about and writing about it every day. And so from a state where I had a pretty neutral view, I've now got a pretty negative view. And I don't, does that matter? I don't know. Maybe sort of unveiling yourself into the international community more, as the Qataris have done. Maybe that's what matters. And you kind of, this goes way beyond football. There was a huge air base in Qatar where the US regional air force is based, where Britain has planes. So football is part of a much bigger picture of Qatar using the money from the gas to sort of cement their position on the world stage. They're not there just to be taken over by regional power, as has happened to them throughout their history. So I still feel uncomfortable about saying I'm definitive about exactly what this is all about.
Yeah.
But I think what we can say is, at the moment, certainly in the short term, this is pretty bad for the reputation of Qatar. Not least because the whole tournament just feels so weird, and a lot of stuff, to be honest, doesn't really work. Like the Wi-Fi doesn't really, and this is a journalist complaint, nobody cares about this, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work. The media shuttles don't really work. There is no sort of comprehension of, how to run a football tournament. It's staggeringly difficult here to watch football. You'd think that, I've been to Cups of Nations where clearly it's about promoting the nation. You go to Equatorial Guinea or Gabon during a Cup of Nations they're hosting. It's on telly all the time, 24/7. There's reruns of games, there's the live games, there's build-ups of games. Here, we're getting kicked out of media centres, an hour and a half, 2 hours after the final whistle, so you can't watch the next game. beIN Sports is not being shown. They've got the local rights. It's not being shown in lots of the apartment blocks and lots of the hotels. So actually watching the tournament, this tournament is spent $250 billion on, is incredibly difficult. You start to, where's the joined up thinking there? Who are they actually trying to show this to?
I did see somebody make the point that actually the sports washing element of it is far less important to them than that local geopolitics, the point you made about Saudi Arabia gobbling them up, and that ultimately they don't really care if we think that they're slightly dodgy when it comes to women's rights and gay rights or workers' rights. They don't care about that. What they do care about is how they're perceived by the United Arab Emirates and how they're perceived.
I do wonder on this what the longer term impact for FIFA will be. because you saw Infantino with Mohammed bin Salman on Sunday, and I think he's playing a very dangerous game here. That I sort of am assuming that Infantino's motives here are partly weakness, and he's just being manipulated by stronger forces. Partly, he just wants to secure his presidency, and he's been re-elected again unopposed. But he's got the African bloc vote by putting Patrice Motsepe in charge of CAF. He's pretty much got the Asian bloc tied up, and that's enough to win him the election. But the power still resides with Europe and South America. They're still the big football nations. They're still the big football markets. And if, as has been planned, the CONMEBOL nations join UEFA in the Nations League in 2024, if you do have that alliance there, then that suddenly is a very powerful bloc, to which I'm assuming the US and Mexico, who have the big TV markets outside those two regions, I'm assuming they could very easily be attracted. And they can go away and say, actually, what do we gain from Asian football, from African football? We'll have our own World Cup and we'll run it on our lines with, gay rights respected, women's rights respected, and not exploiting migrant workers. And I think there is you saw that when he backed down on the idea of having the World Cup every 2 years, that actually if UEFA and CONMEBOL speak with one voice, they still have the power, even if they don't quite have the votes in FIFA Congress. And I think it's a really dangerous game Infantino's playing, particularly that goading of Europe on Saturday. The ludicrous thing about Europe has to apologise for 3,000 years of crimes. Well, of course Europe should acknowledge its faults in the past. But the idea that you can't point out that it's not acceptable for migrant workers to be working 16 hours a day in 40-degree heat because Alexander the Great invaded Persia is just nonsense.
Jonathan, great stuff as ever. We leave it there. Thanks a million.
Cheers, thank you.
That's Jonathan Wilson with some interesting thoughts from Qatar this morning.